the elite. But no one seriously thinks...
Or possibly people who don't like the moderator. I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure.
Especially. But none of that is particularly, it doesn't dispose of the argument. The real question is, how was Donald Trump, how was it that we had this moment where a demagogue was able to use tools of social media at his disposal to speak directly to millions of people? Now, you might then say, blame Twitter or blame a new information economy that disintermediates a guy like Trump from, or disintermediates the media from, between Trump and his audience, right? Those are sort of broad phenomena. That's an interesting discussion. But where does the weight of the blame lie? Is it really the fact that the people who worked hardest to oppose Trump, look, I'm elite media, I'm a Wall Street Journal deputy editor, okay? I've done everything in my power to stop this guy. I've done everything in my power to scream from the rooftop that this is a form of demagoguery that we saw in the 1930s in Europe and in the 1970s in Latin America, we're seeing today in the Philippines. You can blame me for not having a big enough megaphone or for not being an articulate enough columnist, right? I accept that. But don't blame me, okay, or you, or anyone else in this audience for this phenomenon of hatred, bigotry, nativism, and an angry turn at people who should not be blamed, whether it's the, quote, elite, Brad, or whether it's Hispanics or Muslims.
Thank you, Brad. I want to remind our audience that we are in the question and answer section of this Intelligence Squared U.S. debate. I'm John Donvan, your moderator. We have 4 debaters, 2 teams of 2, arguing it out over this motion, blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. I want to let Tim Carney respond to what you just said.
I will disagree with Brett's implications that his columnist skills are limited. I think they're excellent, and I don't blame him for anything he's done. He's performed valiantly during this campaign. What I do blame him for, or his publication for, is what they did before. I've agreed with the Wall Street Journal 80% of the time, but when when Brett was advocating for the Iraq War, that was creating this system where the Republicans and where the elites were promising we will be greeted as liberators, and you created a war that helped destroy the Republican Party, made Nancy Pelosi the Speaker of the House, and that created this total distrust of the government. The support for the Wall Street bailout, which then we saw a stock market rally to record highs and median wages stay totally flat until the data we got today. So yes, Brett Stevens has performed very well this election, but a lot of the elite media there too, by advocating stuff like the disastrous Iraq War, helped set the table for somebody like Trump to say these people are stupid, they don't know what they're doing.
And Brett Stevens, I want to point out, is the only person on this stage who has won a Pulitzer Prize for commentary. And I want to congratulate you for being wise enough not to pull that out yourself. So, one more question, then we want to move on.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tina Hastings. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying basically the Republican elite is responsible for the Trump phenomenon. Would you say that they're also responsible for the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, another populist candidate who made...
Well, that's not directly on point. I find it an interesting enough question because the issue of distrust in institutions remains relevant. I want to see what what you have to say about that. Tim Carney.
Yeah, I would definitely say both parties are responsible for the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. And when I camped out at Occupy Wall Street, and what I saw there was just a deep dissatisfaction, this idea that people no longer had the ability to control the world around them, sort of politics in the Greek sense of the word, of being an active member, being a citizen, that was evaporated, that the concentration of power in Washington, the concentration of wealth, that those were 2 sides of the same coin, and that we had been stripped of our power as citizens, and that was what drove a huge part of Occupy Wall Street, a huge part of Bernie Sanders, and I do think it was a bipartisan thing to suck power into Washington, D.C., that subsequently sucked wealth into Washington, D.C., left the rest of the country not just poorer, but more powerless.
Okay, another question? Ma'am, right, yep. And there's a mic coming up the aisle, up the stairs to you.
Hi there, my name is Jane Gordon. One of the propellants of the Trump movement is this notion that there should be a return to a Christian nation. And I would like to ask the proponents what role they believe that has played in Mr. Trump's rise.
I'm gonna pass on that because I feel that this side actually made that argument strongly, or touched on that argument, not strongly. And it doesn't really get to the issue of the elite thing. It's a second factor. There are other factors as well, and we're trying to stick on the elite one.
Hey, my name is Jeremy Senderowitz, and I have a question for the proponents of the motion. Do you think that the Trump voters are accurately assessing the failures of the elites and how those failures, real or not, have affected their lives?
Tim Carney.
Yeah, I go to these Trump rallies. I've been to a dozen Trump rallies in 10 states, and I've talked to them. And I wouldn't say that these are the people who are the sharpest policy analysts in the world, but that's not to their discredit. Most normal people don't spend their time doing what we spend our time doing, an analysis on it. They blame it on immigrants, and I think that that is inaccurate. They blame it on free trade, and I think that that is inaccurate. But the reason that they are blaming it on them, the reason that the fact that they are suffering economically is inarguable. Manufacturing jobs, we've lost millions of them over the last decade. And the fact that working class wages is falling is also inarguable. Mostly their solutions, protectionism and closing the borders, I find those both counterproductive and dumb, but their assessment that their own economic and as Ben said, the economic well-being of their neighbors has gone down, that aspect I see as accurate.
Jennifer Rubin, response?
My, is that condescending? Kind of elitist, actually, to assume that voters don't know what they're talking about or don't know what they think. They're voting for someone whose views are very well known. Whether you and I agree with them is beside the point. We should stop infantilizing them. These people are responsible, they know what Donald Trump is selling, and they like it. And let's not say, well, they're not the sharpest knife in the drawers. My, isn't that condescending?
We're going to now go to conclude this round to what we call the volley round. And the volley round is a very, very tightly timed round. And each team, one member of each team will have 30 seconds to point out the supreme weakness in their opponent's argument as they've heard it presented tonight. And then the other team will have 45 seconds that they can, one or both speakers can respond to rebut the attack on their argument, and then we will reverse the trend. So there will be a clock behind them. When their time is up, I'll ring this bell. They have to stop talking, and the voice goes to the other side. So which of the two of you would like to, going first with the for side, you have 30 seconds then. Ben Domenech, the supreme weakness in your opponent's argument starting now.
I think the weakest aspect of their argument is really basically that nothing needs to change. It's basically whistling past the graveyard of all of these signs that we have that show that people want dramatic change. They want a dramatic shift away from the direction that policy was going. I think the weakest part of their argument is basically claiming things were going okay, and then this black swan event happened, and now we don't need to reevaluate any of the policy critiques, any of the criticisms that he made or that voters who supported him seem to be making.
Okay, you came in under time. Response, 45 seconds from the opponents.
It's an absurd charge. Plenty of things need to change in this country. There are plenty of ways we could make this country a lot better. The question is, how do you go about changing it? Who is responsible for the problems that this country faces today? And what is some kind of recipe? Now, the Trump message is the people who are responsible are other people, the Chinese and the Mexicans who beat us in trade deals, or Latin American labor that comes in and steals your jobs, or Muslims who want to destroy your communities. I don't think the question is whether there needs to be change. The question is, why is it that they are responding to this message of hatred of others and self-exculpation?
All right, now this team, one of you has the opportunity to one of you has the opportunity now to point out the supreme weakness in your opponents. 30 seconds starts now. Jennifer Rubin.
No matter how hard we try, they've never answered the question as to why Hispanics who have suffered and African Americans who have suffered and women who have suffered are not buying this. What's their response? Are we saying only white people in America have suffered?
Response?
I'm perfectly happy to grant that Donald Trump deals in racism and misogyny, and that is a part of his appeal. And I would say that in no way exculpates the elites. That in fact, it makes a blame even worse, that they paved the road for this man who could deal with this stuff. What happened was the game was rigged, and there was a very conservative way to say, this game is rigged, we're going to unrig it. And that was by railing against crony capitalism. That was by going and arguing for a fairer, freer market. And the Republicans instead squelched it. They pushed away the 47%, and they engaged even more in the crony capitalism. So when the Republicans could have pointed at the actual perpetrators, they didn't. So a guy could come in and he could point at the innocent supposed perpetrators, the immigrants, the blacks, the women. He ran away with it.
And that concludes round 2 of this Intelligence Squared U.S. debate, where our motion is blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. And now we move on to round 3. Round 3 will be brief closing statements by each debater in turn. Those statements will be 2 minutes each. Here making his closing statement in support of the motion, blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon, Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist and host of the Federalist Radio Hour.
I had the luxury of spending a lot of time over the past year and a half in a lot of green rooms with a lot of media elites. And one of the things that I would always ask when I was in these green rooms is if they were close to anybody, family or friend, who was voting for Donald Trump, and ask them why. And what was amazing was the sheer degree to which so many of them knew no one in their lives who was voting for Donald Trump. It's no question here to me that the elites bear the responsibility for the rise of Trump, in part by the thickness of the bubble they have insulated around themselves, where they couldn't understand why this phenomenon was happening. From my perspective, what we've heard tonight from Jen and from Brett, respectfully, is that the overall agenda was not the problem, that war, that immigration policy, that trade policy, that all of these other critiques that Donald Trump was alleging were not the problem, that it wasn't a problem that we can't run a VA or keep track of a terrorist's wife for 24 hours. None of those things were really the big problem in the country. And instead, I hear them saying, I don't know, I mean, it kind of reminds me of saying, you'll be back, time will tell, you'll remember that I served you well. And to me, that's just whistling past the point of understanding what was really going on here, which is the American people looked at the agenda that the elites were offering them, they became disgusted with that failure, and in their desperation, they turned to a man they didn't fully understand because he offered them something different from the failures they knew. Vote for the motion.
Thank you, Ben Domenech. And that motion is blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. And here to summarize his position against that motion, Bret Stephens, Deputy Editorial Page Editor and author of the Global View column for the Wall Street Journal.
Well, today I received a tweet. It's the kind of tweet I get all the time in response to my column. I brought it. I'll read it to you. It's by someone who calls himself Deplorable Nisley. He's one of the deplorables. He writes, "How oven-worthy are WSJ editorial staff? #very." I get this stuff all the time. Now, the question before you is, are you prepared to blame yourselves for this? Are you? What I would say to you is do not condescend to the people who are proud of putting that tweet on Twitter by saying they know not what they do, that they're not accountable for their political choices. Do not, I beg you, do not accord the status of victim to people like this, or people who say slightly less deplorable things. They are not victims. They are looking to victimize somebody else. And finally, I would say, do not indict yourself for the choices and mistakes and the bigotries of other voters. This is a free country. At Trump rallies, people wave American flags, they believe in the American creed, And when you speak to them, they'll say, it's time people take some personal responsibility for their bad choices. Maybe it's time that they should take some personal responsibility for their choices. The blame for the Trump phenomenon ultimately lies with them, not with you. Vote against this motion.
Thank you, Bret Stephens. Blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon is the motion. And here making his closing statement in support of the motion, Tim Carney, senior political columnist for the Washington Examiner.
A large part of what the opposition has engaged in tonight was an exercise in deflection. That when the camera was pointed at the elites, they said, no, it was this other guy who, he's a millionaire, but we won't count him as an elite. Or when the camera's pointed at the elites, they said, well, the actual dagger was driven home by Trump, or the actual vote is being cast by the voters. And this is an attempt to shift the burden. The burden is not whether Trump voters, the question is not whether Trump voters are responsible for Trump winning. The question is not whether Trump is responsible for Trump winning. And the question isn't even whether Sean Hannity is responsible for Trump getting the nomination and being at 44% in the polls. The question is whether the elites bear blame for this man rising up here, for a party, a once great party, they used to call themselves grand, whether they're responsible for that party crumbling, whether the elites are responsible for Trump being within striking distance of winning this election. That's a question. You can't let them deflect from it by pointing out that other people are to blame. Of course the blame goes wide, but ultimately what do we do in this society? What do we as journalists try to do? We try to hold the powerful people accountable. You have 4 journalists on this stage, and we all spend our days doing this. Bret did not win a Pulitzer Prize for nothing. Jen has not been at one of the most widely respected publications in the country, the Washington Post, for nothing. We hold the powerful people accountable. So to say that the elites don't deserve the blame, which is implicit in their motion, is to say that the people failed their elites. That's what you're saying if you're voting against the motion. If you vote for the motion, you're saying that the American people have been let down. Did the elites fail the people, or did the people fail the elites? Thank you.
Thank you, Tim Carney. Blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon is the motion, and here making her closing statement against the motion, Jennifer Rubin, author of the Right Turn blog for the Washington Post.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to my opponents, my esteemed colleague, the moderator. I must say, when I first got this topic, I thought I would find on the other table Bernie Sanders or maybe Noam Chomsky. It's, after all, the province of the unhinged left to assume that there is a vast conspiracy to make the world rotten for the little guy. We live in the greatest time in human history. It's the time where people live longer, fewer are in poverty, the average person has encyclopedic access to the world's knowledge. Imagine my surprise when I saw that there were 2 conservatives on the other side. Conservatives believe in Adam Smith and Reagan and Milton Friedman. They know about comparative advantage in trade, that both sides benefit. They know the lump of labor fallacy, that there are only a fixed number of jobs, is nonsense. At least they used to know that. They don't believe in victimology. They don't believe in blame casting. They don't believe in any of those things. So it's peculiar in the extreme that we should be facing the arguments of Luddite leftists and nativist knuckle-draggers from our opponents. I assume they took this in good faith, but I would like to cling to my belief that they really don't believe this. I would like to believe that conservatives, good conservatives of high principles, still believe that what is known as the liberal international order has brought freedom, prosperity, and happiness to millions. It's lifted billions of people out of poverty. Like democracy, it's not perfect, but it's the best economic system the planet has always known. And it is at heart conservative.
Thank you, Jennifer Rubin. Your time is up. And that concludes round 3 of this Intelligence Squared U.S. debate, where the motion is blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. And now it's time to learn which side you feel has argued the best. We want to ask you to go again to the keypads at your seat and vote a second time. It's the same system as before. Take a look at the motion. Blame the elites for the Trump phenomenon. Push number 1 if you agree with the motion with this side. Push number 2 if you're against, you're with this side. Push number 3 if you remain or became undecided. And we'll lock out the vote shortly. I want to just say a couple of things. The first thing I want to say is, boy, did we have a great kickoff to our New York season. The debaters made this interesting, intelligent. They respected each other, which is part of what we're trying to get across here, but they were argued very, very robustly at the same time. It shows you can disagree without having to sling nastiness at each other. I want to congratulate them for the way that they conducted this debate. And I want to thank everybody who got up and asked a question. Even if we didn't take the question, I know it takes guts to get up in front of everybody. And I think all of the questions were had something in them that's worth considering. I only pass when it doesn't work within the time frame in the motion. But I want to congratulate everybody who got up and did that, and everybody else who wanted to. For those of you who are new to Intelligence Squared, I want to point out that we are a nonprofit organization. We are a philanthropy. We create this program and we put it out to the world for free. It's being used now in many, many schools across the nation, and we think around the world as well. The podcast that I've been referring to is there for you free. We would love it if you go and download at any point the 124 debates. This makes 124 tonight. We also exist as a radio show that can be heard on stations across the country. Just check your local listings on public radio stations. But all of that takes money, and to be honest, the ticket price doesn't come close to paying for the cost of putting this on. We have supporters, but we need more. And what I want to say is that the size of the donation is not irrelevant, I wouldn't say exactly, but it's not the deciding factor. We would love it if all of you would be willing to contribute at some point. Don't worry, nobody's going to hit you at the door on your way out, but you can go to our website and make a donation. It would mean a great deal to us, and we have plans to get bigger, but to get bigger, we need that kind of support. Our next debate is going to be here on October 26th. I'm sorry, I put that another way. Our next debate here will be on October 26th. The motion will be Give Undocumented Immigrants a Path to Citizenship. But our actual next debate will be in downtown at NYU. That's on October 13th. And on that night, we are going to be debating at NYU Skirball Center on the motion Blame Big Pharma for Out-of-Control Healthcare Costs. And we have a really great panel for that one. We have the oncologist and ethicist and former National Institutes of Health official Zeke Emanuel, along with Neera Tandon, who is president of the Center for American Progress, and she worked on the Obama healthcare reform team. And against them on that motion, Paul Howard, who is director of health policy at the Manhattan Institute, and Lori Riley, executive vice president at Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. So that one is going to be lively and quite robust. Again, that one is on the 13th of October downtown at NYU, and you can get tickets from our website and see the rest of our season lineup there. And I've already mentioned that our app is available on Apple, at the Apple Store and the Google Store at Google Play, and we have a Roku app now for those of you who know what that is. So the results are in. The motion was Blame the Elites for the Trump Phenomenon. You've heard the arguments for and against, and as always, we've had you vote twice, and as always, victory will go to the team whose numbers have moved up the most in percentage points from the first vote to the second. So let's look at the preliminary vote. In the preliminary vote, Blame the Elites for the Trump phenomenon. 32% agreed, 27% were against, and 41% were undecided. That's very high for us. Those are the first results. Let's look at the second results. The team arguing for the motion, Blame the Elites for the Trump phenomenon, their first vote was 32%. Their second vote was 58%. They pulled up 26 percentage points. That is the number to beat. Let's look at the team arguing against the motion. Their first vote was 27%. Their second vote was 33%. They only pulled up 6 percentage points. It means the team arguing for the motion has carried this debate, Blame the Elites for the Trump phenomenon. Our congratulations to them. Thank you from me, John Donvan, and Intelligence Squared US. We'll see you next time.